Plays podcast is here. We are 2 weeks from the NBA trade deadline, and my name is Brian Robb, bringing aboard another regular, Chris Forsberg, NBC Sports Boston, because Chris, today it's the point guard discussion. You had a great piece on NBC Sports Boston on Marcus Smart and his future of the Celtics. I wrote something today on Dennis Schroder and whether his future in Boston could potentially go a lot farther than most people anticipate. And so that's where we start today. I think honestly, it's probably the biggest question for this team heading in to the trade deadline. So let's start with Smart though. Let's start with your piece and where things stand after his glorious return this past week, where he's what plus 72 in the last two games here.
Ooh. Yeah, and so like I'll relent that some of that is probably the strength of competition, and the Wizards and Sacramento Kings don't play a lot of defense, so maybe it looked a little better than just like a magical boost from Marcus's return. But it did make me think. I think in both those games, and I know people you can love or hate the potential assist column, but Marcus had 12 potential assists in each of those games, and I thought he really tried to push the pace. He tried to make the right play, and especially in that Kings game, he throttled down his shot attempts and was just content to play defense and feed everybody else. And that is the best version of Marcus Smart. Now, is that sustainable? We'll find out. We'll find out pretty quick too. There's a lot of good teams coming up, a lot of good offensive teams, a lot of good defensive teams, especially with Miami on the horizon. So, how did the Celtics fare, and does the offense still run good against better opponents? We'll know that pretty quickly. But the one thing I keep coming back to as we kind of assess this trade deadline is the Celtics aren't trading Jayson Tatum. They're not trading Jaylen Brown, and they're not trading Robert Williams, barring like something completely unforeseen, some
Yeah.
superstar becoming available, all that. But so that makes Marcus Smart your most tradable asset. You haven't developed your young guys. You don't have any glitzy draft picks. So Marcus Smart is probably the piece that can get you the most return. So they have to entertain every idea. But I just feel like if you're going to be a defensive minded team, if you're still not sure if this is four-man core is what you're riding forward with, and you maybe want a little bit more time, I guess I'd be surprised if they make a move. And I don't know if I felt that way a couple weeks ago. I probably thought maybe, geez, tear this thing down. It looks awful. And I don't want to let two games start to change the way I look at it. But when they have been healthy, they've been very good. The numbers are good. So before we even get into Schroeder, I guess where's your head at with Smart? And if I told you, so here's the part I wrestle with, and I think if I'm being honest, I think the front office is wrestling with this. If a team comes along and says we can offer you a first round draft pick for Marcus Smart to at least start the conversation, where are you at? Are you that like it's time to move on from Marcus Smart, or are you on the let's see this thing a little bit further?
I'm on the. I mean, where's that first round pick? I guess is my next
It's
part of
it,
the
it,
question.
it's a
Like,
contender, right? No
yeah,
no
so it's like early
non-contenders.
20s.
Yeah.
We'll say that. Like maybe unprotected, but like this team is definitely making the playoffs. Yeah, I'm aligned lines. You're like, if you look at these last two games, you're like, you're gonna take the bait. You're gonna take the bait from like, and then I mean the numbers, as you pointed out in your article, of the starting five and the core four together with Smart and those guys, they're pretty good. They're pretty damn good. And Smart, to his credit, in these games, really embracing the facilitator role, not taking shots. Again, good things happening when Smart's not forcing that stuff. But also, you're facing two teams that are maybe playing as bad as anyone in the league right now, in the Wizards and the Kings. So it's nice that there are 2 weeks left, and there is a better lineup of teams to face to kind of assess on the fly here. Okay, was this just two hot shooting nights for the Jays and everything looked well, or is this Smart fully buying into his facilitator role, albeit a little bit late this season? But if he starts to do that, if they win, if they go to 5 out of 6, like I think you can start to say, okay, what can we change around the rest of the roster? Like kind of go further down the list
Right.
and keep Smart in that role as a defensive stalwart and a facilitator.
And so then that plays into what you wrote about Schroeder, right? And this is part of the whole Marcus Smart conversation to me is the Celtics must have at least some idea about what their plan is moving forward with the point guard's position. And maybe that's, hey, it's Marcus until we figure something else out. Or maybe it's, we really want to go after Bradley Beal. Maybe it's we really want to bring back Dennis Schroeder. And if you feel any of those things, like if you feel like Marcus Smart isn't your guy long term, then there's more motivation to move him. And maybe that helps you make that decision. But the curious thing for me is okay, so Schroeder's had some really good performances, mostly in spot starts, but the numbers still haven't been as good as the Marcus and Jays when Schroeder's out there. I think part of it is stylistically, as much as he's a nice luxury as a scorer, it doesn't quite fit at times. Now, when he's attacking and dishing and doing all those things, when if you could get him to embrace the Marcus Smart way of playing right now, maybe it would. But I don't know if that was what Dennis Schroeder wants to do long term. So I'm still very much in the camp of it's time to move on from Schroeder, and I get why they rolled the dice with it, but and I'd even be okay if they carried him through to the end of the year if you're just sort of shrugging your arms and saying second round draft pick doesn't matter, we're just gonna ride it out with this core and keep as much talent and see what happens, and we'll figure it all out in the summer. But I think I told you offline we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, and I said it's been a little weird, even as the all of us have sort of sat here saying like, oh, it makes sense, just move on from Dennis Schroeder. I've heard internally there is some support for keeping him around, and I don't know if that's beyond this season. I think it's more first year coaching staff that clearly wants to go for it. You've got Brad Stevens, who historically doesn't like the idea of just like selling off pieces and just like trying to ride those veterans. So I think there is some internal support, but I think everybody also understands like eventually you got to clear some space for the young guys too and figure this thing out. So there's a tough balance there that they're trekking. I think what the best point you made was, the start of the year, we're like, oh, there's no way the Celtics can get him back for $7 million. Now you start looking around the league and you're like, maybe that's not as much of a slam dunk as we think, and maybe they do have to consider it because of the how difficult it's going to be to supplement this core, no matter what path they choose.
Right. I mean, you look at just the options they have in free agency going forward and the talent train, and even if you don't think he's your long term answer, just letting a guy walk for a second round pick, like what does that do for you in the big picture? If there is any chance that he might resign or any chance that you might use Smart in a trade in the offseason and then could use another, a cheaper replacement that you don't have to use your mid-level exception for. So I think that, to your point, like you have to, a lot of this goes into the long-term planning right now. And I think Schroeder's market this offseason, even if there was cap room, I don't think there would be a huge one there because the point guard position around the league is incredibly deep, and he's a flawed player, a useful one, but a flawed one that most teams aren't going to hand the keys in the starting lamp to. And so from that standpoint, you look at where the Celtics are at and what it might cost to retain him, and then you think like it's not like a shot in the dark. It's like, no, this is like, I think this could end up being his best option to get even a little bit of a raise because you look at a guy like Jeff Green, once you like fall off like that, big money stage, like getting back into the mid-level exception picture, it's not easy. You're not going to build yourself more of a market there. And I don't think Schroeder's done anything this year to really make a huge demand for him.
And Mike, I'm curious where he is now, and certainly like coming into the year, he probably felt like, oh, I need to reestablish my value, and he sort of said as much in your article that you missed out on that bag, and naturally you're like, how do I get back to that? But he's also made a good amount of money in his career, and at this point, I do think when you get to that age, you probably start thinking about the bigger picture and where can I compete, and what gets me that big next contract. Well, it might not be scoring 20 points per game for a terrible team. It might be being a core piece of a championship contender. And so he's going to have to balance all that. And it'll be a very interesting offseason for him. I just wonder, if the Celtics have a priority, will the Celtics get to the point where they prioritize playing the young kids enough that they just have to swallow hard and, ignore that fact. Again, it would help if you knew what is coming next, but I think there's so many variables involved that adds a layer of complication. It's just another reason I don't think we're going to see a whole lot. As much as they're active talking to teams, I think it's a whole different level of actively talking to teams and then being willing to pull that trigger and make a move. And the inconsistencies haven't helped. And just, I don't envy Brad Stevens' position because there's just like, in past years, I thought it was as simple as Danny Ainge needs to try and make a move. And would he go to the price that it would cost to get a Harrison Barnes or whatever? This year, it's not nearly as clear cut. And it can't be easy for him to try to figure this thing out.
And on that, let's talk about the young guys for a second in terms of where they're at. Everyone's shown some flash here or there, and most of them have shown, the worst of what they can be this year too. Are they good enough to clear veterans out for them? And just in terms of like, do you think does Celtics need that information this second half of the season to figure out like what they have, or is that just going to be a situation being like, you know what, Pritchard, Juiceful, Romeo, and Aaron, like who knows if they're good enough? And guess what? If we give them more minutes and they stink, well then we're in an even worse spot because then like what value do they have in the first place anyway? And now we have even more of a talent drain. So I like where do you think where do you fall on that front? Because it's clear now like Ime, like where they stand in the pecking order right now, they're just going to be wild cards, if anything, in the rotation going forward.
I mean, if Peyton has to wait till 9 minutes left in a 50-point game to get his call, like, which absolutely blew my mind that those guys weren't in there to start the fourth quarter. And I know Aaron got in there a little bit earlier.
Horford played 30 minutes in that game.
Unbelievable. And he was 1 of 9. Like, what are we doing? I know they had 2 days afterward. I'm sure that's part of the reasoning, but oh my God. So, yeah, if I'm one of those young guys, I'm not particularly bullish on this team going all in. You have a coach that clearly prioritizes veterans right now, and you have a general manager, when he was the coach, prioritized veterans. So either Brad has to alter the way he thinks and force Ime's hand, or Ime has to just relent. And I think, especially if they continue to have a surge here in the next week, it's going to be really difficult for him to do that. He's going to lean on Richardson. He's going to lean on Schroder. He's going to lean on Al. And he's just not going to get to that point until the Celtics either decide as an organization they need to throttle backwards a little bit and be okay with some extra bumps in the road and just lean into those young guys. And to bring this conversation full circle, I think that's part of the conversation with Marcus Smart. I'm not trading Marcus Smart unless I'm willing after that to trade more veteran pieces and embrace the youth. Because it can't just be like a one-off. You can't just trade Marcus Smart and then be like, yeah, we're still riding forward with Josh Richardson and Dennis Schroder. Like, to me, that doesn't make sense. Like, you're sacrificing the now and not building for the future. It all comes back to something I've said repeatedly since they've started this bumbling ways, early in the season. You have to pick a path. And I think this might be the Boston's biggest difficulty right now is that Ime's a first-year coach and feels this inherent pressure to win, especially in this city. Brad Stevens is a first-year GM who feels a pressure after not living up to expectations last year. And it's going to be difficult for both of them to think differently and think outside the box than they normally have. And I think that all works against the youth. All that being said, I think if they could step back and see the forest from the trees, you need to understand, like, whatever comes next hinges so much on developing young talent or at least figuring out what you've got. And I'd hate to see them win a playing game and get bounced in round 1 and then say, well, we still don't know what Romeo Langford is. He's due $5 million. What are we doing? Or to deal Aaron Nesmith because he's just not getting any playing time here and you haven't been able to figure out what he is. And so you're just like trade him. Although I will say, if you're just not going to play him and they have some value, then just move them. Because it's just not going to happen here. And at least I can sit here and be angry when Aaron Nesmith develops into Duncan Robinson, and at least we can just move on. But I don't know. That's just I get why it's difficult, but it is infuriating when you consider the fact that this is a 500 team.
I agree 100% with that. And to your point on like Nesmith for the younger guys, that's why you can't, even if you don't pick a path. Like picking a path is like getting what you can get for the young guys now. Like that's a path. Yeah. And that's a path that like even if it's like 80 cents on the dollar for those guys, because guess what? If they're not playing the second half of the season, all that value is just doing is going down or staying put. And I mean, picking up the $5 million option on Romeo made sense at the time. Is he going to get that money? Would he got that money based on this season?
No way.
Probably not. Not even close. And so, his value is probably shot. Nesmith and Pritchard, probably too early to tell. Is there a team or two who look at those guys, especially Nesmith, who they're like, is even more of a mystery this year, I think, and be like, hey, we could turn that guy into something if we got in the system and be able to give him minutes and develop him. Then you should probably take what you can get there if you're not going to be moving any of the other pieces. And so that's what it comes down to, I think.
And maybe they're sweeteners in another deal. So maybe you're willing to move Al Horford and you're trying to get something back that maybe can help you now, can help you later. And so you have to throw in an Aaron Nesmith because the team taking him on is like, well, all we're getting is maybe a little cap relief with Al. And that's they still got to eat $14.5 million next year if they cut bait with him. So I just think all this stuff is very difficult. I don't see one of the hard parts I have when I look around the league is finding like obvious trade partners for the Celtics. Yeah, they can move Schroder and send out some money to pay for his salary, or move Bol and PJ Dozier and get off those deals. But there's nothing like, bigger splash that I say this makes sense for both sides. And I think that's what the biggest trouble that Brad Stevens going to roll into. I don't want to hijack your show here, but I do want to know, because I always find this fascinating. If we promoted GM Brian Robb in place of Brad Stevens at the trade deadline, what is your preferred overall path? What would you do?
I think the preferred overall path is taking a step back in the present. I think getting what you can get you don't have to trade everyone, but getting what you can get for those guys, getting the better draft pick this year. If you could obviously still make a plan even if you move a bunch of these guys. But at the same time, you at least have a better idea of where you stand with your whole roster, particularly if you're not interested in having the veterans you have and supporting roles be a part of the long term. Do I think that's realistic? Do I think that they're going to go that direction? Probably not, based on the track record of the people involved right now. But I think, there's certain guys, like Ennis Freedom, there's no, guys like that to me, even if you can't transfer, you have to pay to get him out of there.
You're not doing
move him, move on. Yeah. It's and I'll give him a credit. He has stopped playing. We've talked about this for a while. He did stop playing him as of Sunday. And the problem is, for the time being, is that his rotation is not exactly feasible to have Horford and Robb start and have them split 48 minutes. But that's where, Brad Stevens, go get a playable backup center. Maybe if you want to go for it now, make your roster make more sense for the present, and then you can say, okay, we can have a better gauge in what this group can actually be. Because given obviously all the health issues and COVID and stuff like that, it's not to say that it's totally, we don't want to play the excuse game here, but yeah, if they show in the next 2 weeks before the trade deadline that what they're doing is a little bit more sustainable, then that's what makes sense for this group now, if you're not going to go in the other direction.
Yeah, and so it's so funny, because there's probably been 4 times in this season where I said, okay, the next 4 games they're going to tell me what we're going to do here for a path, and we're just running out of time. And unfortunately, to this point, the indication is that there's no end to the roller coaster. Now, am I more hopeful based on these 2 games? Of course, because they've looked better than they ever had in this stretch. And all that despite the fact that Ime still hasn't figured out to take Al Horford out of the starting lineup and put Grant Williams in there. So, there's still moves.
Do you think that's a pride thing right now? What do you think is? You think that's I can't lose Al. We can't bring Al off the bench.
I think, honestly, it's just the starter numbers have been so good that, he took the first step. He took all of our advice, because all of us wrote it on the same day and was like, hey, and I think he said, all right, I can't break up the starting unit yet, but I'm going to stagger him from there and make sure that we're not playing any other big, because there's no one else I trust on this roster right now, unless Ennis can play against another bruiser, and which is fine. Ennis can ride out the year being the bruiser. Embiid's in town, great. Ennis gets 15 minutes. That's a factor, and hopefully they'll have another big that unlike Bruno Fernando, that they are comfortable going to after the deadline, that can sort of bridge those minutes when Al and Robb aren't out there, or if for whatever reason, if someone gets in foul trouble, or if it's just a bad matchup, whatever the case may be. But I do think there's just a loyalty to a veteran. I do think it's just Al has been good at everything besides shooting the ball. But when offense is your number one hindrance right now, it is sort of mind-numbing to me that you don't at least try it. Now, I will say, Ime had Grant in there at the closing time to the first half the other night. It's clear he sees it. It's not like someone in this building isn't telling him that this would be a lot better, that the numbers are far more juiced when you have another shooter on the floor. But so maybe it'll come to a point where it's just, the issue gets forced. Maybe Al will get injured, or Al needs to downshift because he's playing 30 minutes a night and probably in a blowout win, and that'll resolve itself. Or maybe the trade deadline will do it. But it's a little bit baffling. And so it's why I just hope they don't get stuck in that sort of where you're hopeful that this team will make a surge, so you're sacrificing the potential future gains, and move Schroder and bring back a center, but does that really change the calculus of this team or the trajectory? No, it's still flawed. And so I don't envy the position they're in, but Sometimes you have to make tough decisions about the direction, and that's going to be tough. Brad put this roster together. He wants to see it succeed. He loves the veterans. He wants to see them. He wants to play those guys, and so getting everybody on board with what might be the preferred path is hard. But maybe they'll rip off 3 more wins in this stretch. Maybe Jayson Tatum will continue, as Brad Stevens said on the radio this morning, to throw fire, and maybe it makes it easier to lean a little bit heavier into just keeping this group together, and maybe trying to seek either riding it out with the veterans or pulling the trigger on smaller deals. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't know how I feel about that. I'm slightly conflicted.
I mean, Jayson Tatum playing like an MVP candidate does solve a lot of problems. Like, does cover up a lot of things.
It is truly amazing, right? Like that. All it took for the Celtics to look like the Celtics was Jayson Tatum going back to being Jayson Tatum a little bit. And
Yeah.
I mean, you've probably seen the numbers. Like cleaning the glass right now, their expected win total is minus 4.1. So essentially, that means if the Celtics had won all the games they should have won based on their point differential, they'd be 29-20 right now. We'd feel a whole lot different about the trade deadline if they were right behind Milwaukee and right there with Brooklyn, and but unfortunately they haven't been, and we know the reasons why. And as good as their point differential is, and it's slightly juiced from the last few nights, is they're not that team. And so either they've got to get to that level where they play with more consistency, which I'm not sold on through 2 games, or they just got to show it over a longer period, or else I just can't buy in fully.
Yeah, 4 games would do it. That would be an all-time high for them this year in terms of consistency. All right, so there have been some rumors out there in the last 24, 48 hours, some involving guys we've mentioned. Smart, obviously. One name keeps resurfacing, and I got to bring it up because this was formerly one of my guys. And when you're Daniel Theis, the Celtics kicking the tires on Daniel Theis just months after literally giving him away and paying off his salary to the Chicago Bulls in a move that I think it's fair to know that Brad Stevens was blindsided by, as he was quoted after the trade deadline last March. Make sense of this, Chris Forsberg. Daniel Theis, I assume this is a situation where the Celtics somehow get to move Horford, and you're looking for the backup center of your future. Maybe, I don't know. This is
how many? What's Theis's contract situation? How many years?
Is it like 4 years, $32 million, I believe. And I'm not sure if all that's guaranteed, but I think a lot of it is.
And what would be hilarious is if they somehow traded Al Horford for Daniel Theis, and then started Theis in a 2-big lineup with Robb Williams. Then I would be completely, look, I think we all love Theis and what he brought. I struggle to understand the reasons besides wanting to get off long-term money that Houston would be willing to do that. But, and I think would be a little, not great. Like, look, I'll say this. I've also thought it's going to be difficult for the Celtics to trade Al Horford. But I hope there was a conversation when he signed here or when he got traded here that said, like, hey, we don't really know which way this is going, and if we're going to clear cap space or if we're going to put ourselves in position to make a bigger deal over the summer, you might have to be moved. And so I hope he's at least braced himself for that possibility. I think he would be very disappointed to have to end up in Houston where he'd just be relegated to the OKC rehab program part 2. And I don't know if Daniel Theis changes the trajectory of your year at all. You're not starting him. It's a serviceable big off the bench, but unless you're leaning into Grant and figuring out some more backup 4 minutes somewhere else, I'm not sure I'm ready to believe this. I think we all have a propensity to look at guys that used to play in Boston and dream of ways to get them back. And I wonder if this is more, Daniel Theis doesn't make sense for the Houston Rockets right now. Maybe Boston will go get him.
Yeah, I think the only way something like that, like it has to be part of a much bigger deal involving that, like with other parts going Eastern, maybe a 3-team thing where it's like, okay, so who's taking Horford? Like that could use Horford, and then
But can we do that for a second? I know you want to get to the other rumors, but who is taking Horford?
Well, that's your problem right now. I don't see that team. I really don't, unless the Celtics. I mean, Golden State is the one that made sense at the beginning of the year, but then you look. I guess they have been kind of up and down lately, so you wonder if they'll be like, hey, this is a guy. If you guys really want to go for it this year, having Al Horford off your bench or in place of Looney for 20 minutes a game, like that's a pretty big luxury. The problem is now, like who who are they moving out like in that
Yeah.
deal? Because it's like Wiggins is too good. He's not going anywhere this year. And then everyone else on that team that I think they consider moving makes so much less money. It's hard to find a match there. So unless you're doing some, funny business with a third team involved, it's really tough to find a team that's willing to able to take on that kind of money during this season.
Yeah, I just keep going back to this. I know why the Celtics would have interest in moving off of Al Horford's money and the whole potential to help maneuver this summer, but I just don't. I've struggled when those rumors first.
It's
came
gonna have
out
to be a
because
bad team. It's gonna have to be a bad team that just is like getting
Yeah.
something out of it. Whether it's, is it worth getting off Al Horford and like being like, hey, how about Aaron Nesmith with him, and we'll take back one of your bad contracts. That might be more useful to us than
What
out
if you
the books this
trade?
year.
What if you trade Al Horford to Oklahoma City?
Yeah.
Is that even legal? Can
I
someone
don't
look
think it's
that
legal
up?
yet. They can't do that yet. You got to go a full calendar year.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. Go. Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
So they can do that in the next offseason. They can do that, but they can't do that yet. But
Yeah.
that's so. And then I think it's like if you look at the dominoes of the trade deadline for Celtics, it's like, okay, question one: can you move Al Horford? If the answer is no, okay, go to question two. Like, what value can you get for like Smart, Richardson, and Schroder?
Mhm.
Once you answer that question, okay, does anyone like your young guys? Okay, and then you look at all those answers and then you try to map it out.
Yep.
And it's a real possibility that none of those answers are very appetizing for making moves, and then you throw in the luxury tax stuff into play and things get more interesting. But that is like you said,
The
there's
best thing. The
no
best thing
path,
that could
no
happen.
direct path.
The best path for the Celtics in the next 2 weeks is a contender having an injury. Like
Yeah.
when Rubio went down in Cleveland, we all said, "Oh, maybe Dennis Schroder ends up there." Like, unfortunately, the only way you're going to juice the trade value of the guys you have is that they become a luxury for a team that needs a power forward like Al, or defensive-minded guy, or like someone needs a defensive stopper like Marcus and is willing to splurge maybe a bit more. And even then, I think it's a tough conversation, especially with Marcus. I don't know. Every time I try to even wrap my head around Marcus, I just can't get to the point where I'm like, yeah, that would make sense for the Boston Celtics. And so I always invariably just say no. Hold on. You can always figure these things out over the summer too. You might need Al Horford's contract to make a deal. You might need Josh Richardson to make a deal. And so while I want them to clear some space for the young guys, I also understand that like this might be a quiet deadline, and all these talks might not lead to a whole lot of action. But give me some more rumors.
Yeah. So did you see? So there was, I think in Bleacher Report today, reported before the Hawks traded Cam Reddish, there were talks about Cam Reddish and Kevin Huerter for Smart that did not progress, supposedly. What was your initial thoughts when seeing like something like as like a theoretical? Is this the type of offer that they're getting for Smart right now?
Yeah, I think that probably would have requested more than Smart in that deal, if I'm being honest. Like I know, Reddish didn't have a huge trade value, but yeah, I just think it was funny because like last year, I actually thought the Hawks were the perfect spot for Marcus Smart. I was like, oh, young team sort of needs that boost to get over the top. Turns out I was wrong. They were perfectly fine. They went to the Eastern Conference. Like they and I don't know if necessarily they'd even be interested in that now, but like again, every contender is always going to want a defensive boost and a veteran like Smart, which then should make the Boston Celtics say, do we really want to move Marcus Smart? Is he more valuable to us than what we get in return? And like Huerter and all that, but I think it's at least those are the type of deals you have to at least have a conversation about and think about. But whether you get to the point where you pull the trigger is a whole nother ball of wax.
Yeah, there's no question about that.
Would you have made that trade?
I'm with you. I would have thought about it. I would have been, if it was straight up and there was nothing the Celtics had to send with Smart, I'd be like, I'd think pretty hard because Huerter is signed for a few years, and I think that is the type of player where like that's the perfect type of shooter you need around Jayson and Jalen. The question is, are you going to obviously that's a pretty considerable step back defensively, and so what's worth more to your franchise right now? It might just be a step sideways, and in which case, like, well, where do you going to begin with? So, but that's certainly the type of a player you want to have your eye on if you're going to make the move with him. I
think. Can Luke Kennard stop making so many 3-pointers this week? Like I thought maybe there was a chance the team that's in a tough spot too that the Celtics could sort of sneak in. when he was on the free agent market a couple years ago, I thought it was, would have been perfect to find a shooter like that. And now all of a sudden he's leading them back from 30 down and hitting game winners. And I'm like, damn, there's no way they're trading him now. So not everything is just breaking wrong for the Celtics this week, besides winning 2 games.
Well, yeah. So here's what's going to happen then. Like when you bring up the Clippers and just knowing Brad Stevens, what he's done so far as GM. So they'll trade for Theis. They'll get Marcus Morris back, and they'll keep searching the market. Evan Turner comes out of retirement, and then they'll just try to create some magic.
I was going to say, how do we trade for Rozier? Essentially the 2018-19 Celtics minus Kyrie and Gordon, because that's what got you to the Eastern Conference Finals.
That's a dream. That's a dream team.
So I'm just saying, we'll let's make that a reality.
All right. Well, we got 2 weeks left here. The rumors will not stop at this point, but we'll be around.
Did you see John Hollinger? Did you see John Hollinger mention Devontae Graham as a potential option?
I want to say I didn't, because that would have I don't. I mean, what is Devontae Graham?
It just, my mind went there when we started talking Terry and I get it. What do you think about the whole Dallas scuttlebutt with
Dallas makes sense. I mean, that's where he's from, and they could obviously use a guy like him. So and there's at least a couple intriguing names down there. I don't know if they're willing to move or not, but Brunson and Finney Smith and Kleber, all those guys, I could see some sort of deal coming together there that makes sense for both sides.
It's interesting because I just thought Mark Cuban would never trade Kleber, and maybe he gets to the point where he's okay with that. I like Jalen Brunson. I don't know if it's the ideal fit. It's probably a big step back defensively, right? From Marcus Smart, but I certainly like the player. What is he going to earn this offseason? Are you willing to pay that? So there's a lot of question marks there. I get that one makes sense geographically, just to be, I'm sure Marcus, he always plays well in Dallas and Oklahoma City and all that. But I don't know. I just can't. No one has hit me with a Marcus Smart trade offer that I said, yes, that makes sense, until Danny Ainge swoops in with 2 first-round picks.
Yeah, right.
And
2 first-round picks and Jordan Clarkson.
Whatever. Yeah, I keep trying to think the shooter you could pluck out of Utah. And
Ingles is probably available, but he's that's an expiring deal, and he's in his 30s. So it's all right. Well, what's what are you really getting out of the deal like that?
Nothing. You're not trading Smart for cap space, because unless you have a great idea that you're getting your point guard of the future, Bradley Beal, over the summer, then you're not going that route. Yeah. So
what do you think the Wizards are doing? Whatever this Code Red in Washington right now, and so Bradley Beal, you wonder. I read some of those quotes after that Clippers collapse. He's we shouldn't have been back in this game in the first place. I shouldn't have to slip back in. They're falling apart, right? And they certainly can't feel good about all the good vibes from the first half of the season are gone for them.
It's they have 2 weeks for Mark Bottlestein to come out and say Bradley Beal will only play for the Boston Celtics. He wants to team up with Jayson Tatum, and then boom, skids are greased. They got to take whatever bounty you're willing to get up, bunch of first-round picks and make the contract work. And everyone can sit here and say, oh, no, there'll be better offers out there. That's true, but no one's taking Bradley Beal when they know he can walk away in the summer and go sign with his buddy. So if they want to make that a reality, if Bradley Beal can get frustrated enough, everyone should be sitting there hoping. And I don't know, because I don't know if people want Bradley Beal now that he's having a rough year. But if you are part of the let's make Jayson Tatum really happy club, which should be a priority, you should be rooting vehemently against the Washington Wizards this week.
Certainly something to watch, and the fact, the posturing here is going to be fascinating by all parties on that front, especially as you look at the cap landscape this summer. Not a lot of teams have cap room, much less max cap room, and so it's pretty much all going to be side and trade options if Beal does want to walk, which opens up a whole litany of other situations, but. The Celtics, no matter what, will be in a position to certainly make an offer in that front. Whether it's a compelling one remains to be seen, and whether any of these guys we talked about today will be around for that offer will also be the question in the next 2 weeks.
Next 2 weeks will be wild, and I almost wish as we're doing this we could just fast forward and like a sitcom, screen wipes, and then we find out what happens, and we see either how stupid we look or how smart we look. because usually the latter. Smart.
All right, Chris Forsberg, NBC Sports Boston, pregame, postgame live. We have any more sideline gigs coming up, or are we set for?
That's a good question. There is a couple of days in February that I don't know if we have a sideline report yet, so I might be there. But mostly I'll just be hanging out in my WebEx box, saying nerdy numbers. I keep wanting to rebrand it. I think someone has the talk nerdy to me taken out there, but I think it would be a good way to go and just go lean into analytics. I don't know how WebEx would feel about it, but do some research. Maybe until then we'll be talking about. We'll probably talk about trades straight up through there. So we'll see how it goes.
Listen, I know more about WebEx than I have in my entire life, thanks to you now. So the promotion you're giving them on the product, that's worth every single penny they're spending for you guys. But as always, great stuff, Chris. Thanks for coming on, and we'll be checking back in with you soon. We'll see. What's your prediction here off the air? How many trades between now and 2 weeks?
One trade.
Okay. A big one?
No, just by Dennis.
Just by Dennis. Most boring trade deadline ever for Chris. All right. Stay tuned. Thanks for listening, guys.